Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 69. Reckless Idiot Night Part 2. Izuku couldn't sleep for almost any amount of time before he woke up screaming. He was glad his classmates threw things at him or his teacher chewed him out any time he started to doze off in class, because every time he even so much as blinked, the vivid image of what almost happened took hold of him. He couldn't escape it. Like a dog chasing its tail, he was running from his own mind, and he wasn't getting very far. They hadn't patrolled in 3 days. Izuku refused to let Eraser step foot back in Uptown until he was sure he could keep him safe. He had to be safe. He had to be safe and far, far away. As far away as he could keep him for as long as he could make him stay. His sanity was fraying at the edges, and he didn't know how much longer he could keep Eraser away. If the weekend wasn't fast approaching, he would have started ditching class, but it was Friday, so he just had to wait it out. He had gathered profiles on over 50 different people at this point, but no one new had been showing their face around the block. He wasn't going to get any more information like this. He needed proof, solid, indisputable, concrete proof of criminal activity. Enough to convince the stupid, soulless bureaucrats running the precinct that they needed to get a warrant and raid the place. He had tangential proof of known criminals being seen there, but that wasn't enough. He knew it wouldn't be. He needed to get proof that shit was going down inside the building, and he knew there was only one way to do that. But Eraser was not going to be happy about it. Well, what he didn't know couldn't hurt him. They didn't have time to screw around. They considered making recording devices from scraps like they did with their voice modulator to plant there and bug the place. But there wasn't time. So in their most risky act of shoplifting, they went to an electronics store on the good side of town and swiped everything they would need. Baby monitors and the highest storage SD cards they could find. They had to finagle it a bit so that the footage and audio would save onto an external memory card rather than just broadcasting what it gathered back to the hub thing. But the actual security cameras at the store were behind a locked and alarmed door so that people wouldn't steal them. They had never been so hyper aware of every single movement they made, but they needed to look as nonchalant as possible. And there were cameras everywhere. So not only did they need to look natural, but they needed to hide any sleight of hand they did from the cameras. Maybe they were getting a little too good at this, or maybe there was a god that occasionally decided not to spite them, because they got everything they needed without a hitch. Before they headed out, they took pictures of every single page in their notebook with both the burner phone and their old phone. They stashed the journal in a warehouse a block south and their old phone in another building 2 blocks north. They made a quick stop at a cafe and mooched off their Wi-Fi to set up an automatic email that would be sent to the detective unless they stopped it before tomorrow afternoon, explaining everything they did and where to find all their notes, along with another digital copy of everything they had. This was going to work. The Aikido was going down, whether Ivy was around to see it or not. With everything set in place, they suited up and made their way over to Block 8 as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground. They were going to enter from a window on the second floor, one that every time they'd seen it open, it had to be propped up by a small piece of wood. It was busted and only mildly functional, and he was willing to bet that it didn't lock properly. They were going to go in, plant the bugs, and get out. Easy peasy. Scaling up the wall to the window without being seen was laughably easy, and peering in, it looked to be a restroom that was currently unoccupied. Perfect. Jiggling the window almost resulted in the bottom half of it crashing to the floor inside. They were right. The latch definitely wasn't functional. Luckily, they caught it before it could crash to the ground. Creeping inside, they saw that the faucet was dripping slightly. They had running water here? Not fair! How did they manage that? Flicking the light switch on the wall illuminated the room too, so they flicked it off promptly. How did they get water and electricity in an abandoned warehouse? They supposed they could crowdsource to a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds and professions and probably throw a good deal of money at their problems, but still, they were jealous. Ignoring their mental tangent, they pressed their ear up against the door and listened for a solid minute and a half of silence before they cracked the door open to peek out. The hall was dark and no one seemed to be around, but it looked like they had hired some contractors at some point because this place was actually pretty nice. It didn't look like a dingy old warehouse at all. Well, it did on the outside, but not on the inside. It wasn't exactly the Ritz, but they had hardwood floors, or at least laminate. Bastards. As quietly as they could, they crept down the hall and peeked into the doors on either side. There was a storage room full of cleaning supplies and toiletries, and then a set of stairs, and they could hear people milling about down there. It seemed to be a common area of sorts. They needed to get one of the monitors down there. They could hear only 2 or 3 people, and given the traffic they'd been monitoring, they didn't think it was going to get much emptier than that. Steeling their nerves, they crept down the first half of the stairs and waited. When nothing changed, they tiptoed down the last set of steps and peered into the first level. What they saw pissed them off. These a-holes were living in the lap of luxury. It looked like a bar down there, and they had a pool table and darts and a big old flat screen TV playing sports, and all 3 of the men he heard were sitting on a couch, absorbed in the game. Their frivolities would be their downfall. None of them paid any notice to them as they snuck behind the couch and over to the kitchen bar area, stepped up on a box, and placed the first monitor on top of the cabinets, hidden amongst overstocked bottles of alcohol and overlooking the majority of the room. So far, so good. They only had 2 monitors, so they decided that exploring the top floor a bit more and placing it up there would be in their best interest. The less time they spent around the occupants, the better. Tiptoeing back up the stairs, they went to the left, having already explored the 2 doors to the right. To the left of the stairs was what looked like another storage closet, given how close it was to the door next to it, but it was locked, so they couldn't say for certain. They'd have to come back to that. The room next door looked to be a makeshift conference room. There was a big table and a lot of chairs. They took pictures of as much as they could, but there was little of note, so they moved on to the last door that took up the entirety of the other half of the hall. They opened the door cautiously, but no one appeared to be inside. There was a desk and a couch with a few armchairs. It was like a half office, half lounge, and Ivy was willing to bet that this was whoever was in charge of the Yakudo's office. They poked around drawers and cabinets and found little of note. There was a firearm, which was probably illegal, in one of the desk's drawers, so they snapped a picture of that. The back wall and its cabinets were lined with alcohol. It looked fancy. Not that they would really know, though. Don't people have anything better to do than drink? Another drawer in the desk held a ring of keys. Hell yeah! They were going to try their best to pick the lock across the hall, but hopefully they wouldn't have to do that now. Cautiously, they listened at the door before crossing back to the storage room and quietly tried each key on the ring. Finally, the second to last key slid into place and turned. The small room was lined with filing cabinets on one side and shelves of cases on the other. Ivy wasted no time rifling through everything. The cases were filled with support gear, likely left over from their dealings with the syndicate they took down a couple of months ago. They took pictures of everything as they went through it. They didn't bother opening up every single one, but they documented enough for it to be sufficiently incriminating. Moving on to the filing cabinets, they were pleased to find that they were not locked. They were beyond cocky, thinking that one locked door would keep someone out of here. The files were full of financials and documentation of just so much illegal shit. It was in code, but that wouldn't be difficult to crack. Commie, they were stupid. They spent so long working unopposed that it went to their heads, making them think they were invincible. Ivy was working through the last filing cabinet's worth of documents when they heard movement from downstairs. Shit. They immediately put everything back where they'd found it and locked the door behind them. They were about to gun it for the bathroom when they heard someone coming up the stairs. Shit, 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 shit. They would have to cross in front of the stairs to get back to the bathroom, but there were windows in the office. Hoping for the best, they darted back in there and started jiggling the windows, but they wouldn't budge. They didn't have time for this. Flip! They didn't have time to do anything. Right now, their options were fight or hide. They had no idea who was coming or even how many people were coming, so hide it was. They stuffed themselves into a cabinet on the far wall just as they heard the door open. They could see a sliver of the room through the crack between the cabinet and its door. It was only one guy, but Ivy didn't recognize him. Was this the boss? It would make sense if he was in the office alone. They snapped as good of a picture as they could through the limited view of the room and started the recording on the second monitor that they'd yet to play somewhere. It wouldn't get video from in here, but it would get audio. They might still get something. The man sat down at the desk and started up the computer that Ivy hadn't gotten the chance to mess with yet. Hopefully he would leave soon and they would be able to. Just as that optimistic thought crossed their mind, there was a knock at the door and 3 more men filed in. Figures. The first man grabbed 4 cups off the counter right above Ivy's head and poured each of them a drink before sitting down with them in the lounge area. Damn it, no! Go away! Izuku's spine ached, and he'd been cycling through mute panic attacks and painful boredom for over an hour and a half at this point. One would think the fear of being cornered would have petered out by now, but nope. Looks like that's just going to be a thing for him forever. He was always going to be a prey animal at the end of the day. This sucked. The 4 men who had been droning on and on, he had gathered more than enough evidence on them to lock them away for life. That was, of course, if he ever got out of here. They needed to get out of here. They just needed to wait until these guys left. They'd have to leave eventually, right? Another hour ticked by, and they were about to jump out and damn the consequences. They knew that was an awful idea, but their logical reasoning was in a losing battle against their fear of being cornered. They had to keep reminding themselves that that was stupid, that they weren't really cornered if no one had any idea they were there. Trying to distract themselves, they watched the monitor they had planted downstairs. The place was bustling now. At least 10 people were milling about, most of which they recognized from the profiles they'd been working on. They started new profiles on the 2 people they didn't recognize in an effort to pretend they weren't currently stuck where they were. But there wasn't much information they could gather without being able to hear what was going on. They'd been able to construct robust profiles of for the 4 men in the room, though. They were more confident than that the first man that had entered the room was the leader of the gang, and his name was Shimoda. Something. They supposed that it was a silver lining to the fact that they wouldn't shut up. and leave. At the 3-hour mark, they decided enough was enough. They needed to do something. End of chapter.